For the Pacifica Radio Network, welcome to Planet Waves FM. My name is Eric Francis Coppolino, your host for the next hour or so. Today's edition is for Tuesday, the 26th day of July in the year 2016. Welcome to our program wherever you may be in the world or in the future. It is good to be with you. Today I have a special program for you that's going to be delivered in two parts for ease of listening to the second part, which is approximately 2 hours long. It is somewhat specialized, but it's also really fucking cool. And in that second part, I have an interview that I conducted with a guy named Bob Schmidt yesterday, sometimes known as Robert Schmidt, maybe. You might know him by that name, but he goes by the name Bob, is one of the co-founders of Project Hindsight. Project Hindsight emerged in 1993 as the first concerted effort by astrologers to translate the texts of ancient astrology into modern English accurately and in such a way that astrologers have access to. This was founded by three guys named Robert Schmidt, Robert Hand, and Robert Zoller. A lot of Roberts in one place for one such a quirky project, but that's how it happened. Hence, the Bob part of Bob Schmidt is important because it distinguishes him. But anyway, that's not the only thing that distinguishes him. One of the things that distinguishes him is that he kept up with Project Hindsight by name, by that particular project name, all through the entire time of since 93 till now. And while Robert Zoller went off in one particular direction of ancient astrology, and I'm not sure quite what that was. I think a lot of medieval. And Robert Hand, who you've probably heard of if you're an astrology fan, also focused on many facets of astrology, but did his PhD in medieval astrology. Bob Schmidt kept his focus on Greek astrology, what is sometimes called Hellenistic astrology, which is the basis of the astrology that we have. For example, if you say Venus rules Taurus, you're talking about Greek astrology. If you're saying that Saturn is exalted in Libra, that's Greek astrology. The basic framework of the system that we use, including the names of the astrological signs, all of that comes out of Greek astrology. And last week, after many, many years of research, Bob and his wife Ellen announced that they had traced this back to a core group of founders, as they're referred to in the literature, one of whom, the leading founder, whose name is Eudoxus of Cnidus. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Never been there. Okay, and so what I have for you in the second file, I guess you might say, of this program is a recording of a conversation I had with Bob yesterday where we talk about the discovery, what led to the discovery. And essentially what we're talking about is the inventor of Greek astrology, who was the probable inventor, because we weren't there back then, right? We don't really know. And there's some dispute over who invented Facebook, right? And that's all pretty well documented, right? But was it those other guys, or was it really Zuckerberg and so forth? This is only 10, 15 years ago. So we're talking about something that happened approximately 2,400 years ago. That's a while. And it's, deep back there in the foggy ruins of time, except for the fact that the Greeks wrote things down. And because the Greeks wrote things down, we can go back and read them, and Bob reads Greek and translates Greek into English, and so he's going to tell us what he learned. So I won't say much more about that. I'll introduce that segment in its own place and time when I'm done with the show that I'm going to do today for you, which will include a look at the astrology of August and into early September. We are entering various new astrological landscapes as the Mars retrograde continues to work itself out. by which I mean Mars is still moving very slowly through Scorpio, the sign where it's stationed direct in late June, and it is soon to enter Sagittarius. That adds a whole new kind of color cast to the astrology, however that manifests for you. And there's a few other things. Jupiter will be entering Libra in early September. And so I'm going to give you a quick rundown of those. I'm going to start with that. Then in the second segment after the song break by Talking Heads, I'm going to tell you a story about politics and why I'm not in politics. Personally, I have not been able to bring myself to get involved in watching or in any way doing much with the Democratic National Convention. I followed the Republican National Convention last week because I like to keep tabs on what those people are doing, but I pretty much ran out of energy and needing to focus on life and stuff. And however, I do have some ideas I want to share on the meta level of politics and what I think is going on behind the veil, behind the kind of the scrim onto which is projected this drama that we see, and then the story about the drama told in the newspapers and so forth, and the internet, I guess now. And behind that scrim, there is something. There's lots of things behind that scrim. And I want to talk a bit about what I think personally those things are and how that led me to do other things besides having a full-time involvement in politics, by which I mean as a campaign writer and strategist, which was on my short list of options for things to do with my life when I was getting near the end of university back in the 1980s. All right, so what have we got here? Let's see. At where we are today, let's just pull up a chart for this very moment. The moon's at last quarter right now, and as I speak, the moon is in a super duper close conjunction to the first asteroid and dwarf planet Ceres, which is at 2 degrees of Taurus. So the moon and Ceres are in a conjunction, 4 arc-minute conjunction, a tiny fraction of a degree at 1 degree 52 for the moon as we start, and then 1 degree 56 for Ceres. What's that about? Well, that's a lot of earthy energy. Ceres is what we think of when we think of the goddess, right? There's a lot of goddesses, right? There's, even in the chart I'm looking at Juno and Lilith and Vesta and Pallas Athene and Venus and the moon, lots of goddesses going around. But when we say Gaia, when we say goddess and we think of the earth who supports us and nourishes us and feeds us, and then add to that a bit of mother and a bit of kind of progenitor of the earth, from the earth, that's Ceres. That's the goddess that we're talking about. Most of the others have minor roles, more or less minor roles compared to Ceres, and they're not as complex as a figure of Ceres, because through Roman mythology, Ceres was originally adopted from the Greek goddess Demeter, but was completely rewritten numerous times and reincarnated repeatedly in new forms, but always keeping that Earth Mother feeling, and became something entirely different than Demeter. So they're not exactly the same thing. And Greek and Roman cultures are very different, even though they have similarly structured pantheons. The way they thought about things was different, the way they lived and acted was different, and the Greeks really were innovators in a certain way that the Romans were not. But I think that Ceres, from what I have read in my relationship with Ceres, is a beautiful and vastly complex goddess figure who was one of the last ones of the major points that I was able to get a handle on. I've said this a few times. I've worked with Ceres since the very beginning of reading charts. I figured if I was going to read charts, I might as well read them with at least the 4 major asteroids in them from the beginning. This is before Ceres was considered a dwarf planet. That happened about 10 years ago. and couldn't quite get a handle on this thing. And all of the usual themes of food and emotions and mother-daughter relationships all seemed true, but didn't seem to do it. And what does it for me about Ceres is the personification of Earth Mother. And this translates into various other mythologies. For example, there's a good degree of, let's say, referencing that connects Ceres to this figure who shows up in the Jesus story, the Virgin Mary, in particular one myth wherein she is traveling alone with her child and passes by some people who have a field, and she knows she's being stalked by the cops, whoever's after her. And she says to the people who live in this home by this field, tell them that you saw me, but you saw me a month ago. And then she makes the wheat grow 1 month of growth kind of by miracle, and then keeps going. So there's connections to this whole thing about like working with the fact that the earth is the thing that feeds us. The earth is the fertile territory on which we live. We live on the mother, quite literally, and every bit of wealth and bite of food comes from the earth. And so when we think about Ceres as being related to food and grain, it's not exactly cornflakes we're talking about and saying, oh, that sure, Ceres, cereal, great. No, we're talking about grain as the thing that is fundamental to basically almost every last person on the planet eating, because most of what people eat is grain, and a lot of it is fed to animals who are eaten for meat. And it's the relationship of us to the planet and the fact that the planet feeds us that is what we think of as Ceres in her incarnation as feeder, giver of food, basically. Now, so when you say Gaia and when you say goddess and you treat the earth as a goddess, that's who you're talking about. On the social level, the theme of Ceres that I have most resonated with is the theme of liminality. Liminality is about crossing thresholds, crossing into different levels of existence and experience, and also of status in society. But liminality is also about consciousness. You might think of liminality as the horizon of consciousness, and what is above the horizon is perceivable, and what's below the horizon is not perceivable through normal consciousness. You've got to get there through dreaming or through some kind of altered state of mind experience, or through some shift in consciousness of some kind. So liminality works on two levels. What level are you at in the world and in your work and your relationship to society, and then what level are you at in terms of the liminality of your consciousness? Where do you fog out? At what stage of thought do you say, no, that's enough, I can't take anymore, don't tell me anymore, I don't want to know that? Where is that for you? And is that a moving line, or is that a fixed line? And do you defend that line with a spear, or do you let yourself transgress that and go perhaps where you're not that necessarily eager to go, but you know that you need to learn something and observe something? So meanwhile, today we have Ceres in Taurus, and this is in my opinion, earthiest of the earth signs, though Taurus can be brilliantly mental for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of ideas come out of Taurus, but I think that partly has to do with the ability to ground that creates artists and artistic works that have quite a bit of enduring power and enduring value. They're going to last. The work of particularly Taurus Sun artists I have seen is work that lasts and that is of value, but its value continues to develop and to grow. We're going to listen to some music composed by two. Well, no, the music I'm going to play today is just by one Taurus and his musical ensemble, which is David Byrne. David worked considerably at length and depth with another Taurus named Brian Eno, and I like to use those fellows as descriptions, kind of like archetypes of the enduring power of the work of artists born under this sign. When we're talking about the moon, though, we're really not talking about what is expressive. We're talking about what is receptive. We're talking about what our bodies feel, what we take in, and what we reflect back to our environment more than actively express. So in other words, it's less like sunlight. The moon is less like sunlight, more like moonlight, basically. And by the way, they are exactly conjunct right now as I am riffing on them and their existence. Moon conjunct Ceres at 2 Taurus. So here we are. That at least is the beginning of our conversation. Long beginning. Vesta has also changed signs recently. Vesta is in the first degree of the sign Cancer. So that's an environmental shift that's noticeable. Cancer is one of the 4 signs on the cardinal cross, and it is the rising sign of a chart called the Thema Mundi, which we're going to get into in the other part of the program. So we've got Vesta in a new sign, and Vesta too has a number of levels, one of which is the basic level of hearth and home. Vesta is a kind of a domestic goddess, you might say, and her symbol is a chevron with a flame burning. And so this is the idea that the central organizing principle of the home is the hearth. The central organizing principle of any well-designed house or apartment is the kitchen. If you have a nice kitchen, you pretty much have a livable home. And it's hard to have a livable home without a nice kitchen, as you may have figured out. And the other level of Vesta is this level of devotion. It's the level of tending the flame. I learned about Vesta when I moved into a home in the late 90s that had wood heat. And me and my housemates didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't fill the oil tank up. So we were stuck with the not only the wood stove, none of us having ever really done this before, but a huge pile of wet wood. And when you have wet wood, first of all, it's not that efficient. Second, it's very hard to light the wood on fire, to get it going, to make heat. And therefore, it's important to not let the fire go out. And so for quite a while, in that autumn and winter, till we could get some dry wood from my friend Mike Fink, until we could get some oil in the tank, which changed things. But we had a few months of having to tend this fire around the clock. And it was through this process of tending the fire around the clock, right? Because you don't want to wake up in the morning to a cold house and have to start the fire at 7 o'clock in the morning when you're half awake. So you want to wake up at 4 and stoke the fireplace so that when you wake up at 7, it's still good and hot and you can stoke it again. That's how I learned about Vesta on the level of devotion. It just suddenly made perfect sense what this archetype was about. Then there's the sexual level of Vesta. Vesta in Cancer, the sexual level of Vesta is going to be the sex that you offer for the nourishment of others. I know sex is something people are often trying to get. Well, with Vesta in Cancer, the thing you're doing with sex is you're offering that sex like you're making someone dinner, basically, because you care about them and you want them to have good food. And so Vesta is now in Cancer, and that idea of offering yourself to someone or someone's that you care about is a beautifully Vesta in Cancer image, and the idea of tending the flame is present in that, because sexuality is like a flame that we must tend, or the flame can go out and take many other things with it that we cherish and value, that we want, like our creativity. And Vesta is also sexuality requires devotion, and sexuality is a form of nourishment. So there's a little kind of summary of Vesta in Cancer. And for those people, by the way, who I would consider to be Vesta people who have a prominent Vesta in their chart, for example, it's the highest planet, or it's rising, or it's conjunct the moon, or it's conjunct Venus, there's always something a little bit different about the way that people with a strong Vesta have their relationships. There's always just something that's does not follow the normal template of relationships, where you date and you like the person, and you get married and you stay married and you do whatever. That's for people without a lot of Vesta in their chart. People with Vesta in their chart might find themselves, for example, being in the role of continuously initiating people. People come to them for some purpose, in a sense, to come and warm themselves by the fire that Vesta in the native's chart has, or to learn something, or to pick up something on the theme of devotion, and certainly to tap into the devotion of the Vestal person and benefit from that. So Vesta is a lot about selfless service, and if you have a strong Vesta in your chart, you have to make peace with selfless service, or you're just going to be frustrated and not understand what's going on. And if you're someone who tends to have these relationships where you are acting either as a mentor or initiator, you might want to check and see the placement of Vesta and the aspects of Vesta in your chart and learn more about that story. I think that in its highest manifestation in this kind of role as sexual servant, we're talking about something that is akin to tantric practice, which requires service and devotion and nourishment and a kind of central organizing principle that's different from the one that most relationships are organized around, and that being money. I mean, the reality is that most sexual and romantic relationships, such as marriages, most of them are organized around the bank account, the income, and the property. When there is tantric practice, when someone becomes a tantric initiate, the organizing principle of relationships changes to existence itself. It's no longer about these items on the list. It's no longer about the shopping list. Basically, the organizing principle of one's relationships is more about the devotion to persistent and sustained awareness and exploration and growth. So it's not about being good. It's about being real within the context of staying awake. Okay, so what else going on in the sky right now? Let's see. Got lots and lots going on in Leo. Sun's in Leo, Venus is in Leo, Mercury is in Leo. That's a whole bunch of Leo, and the emphasis of the sky has shifted, and will continue to do so, from water sign orientation of the Mars station direct era, where the Sun and the two inner planets, Mercury and Venus, were in the sign Cancer, making a grand trine to Mars in Scorpio, and then lots and lots of planets in Pisces. So there was, for the early part of summer, a strong water emphasis. Now that we're midsummer and the sun has shifted into Leo, it's taken the two innermost planets with it, Mercury and Venus. They too are in Leo, and those now join Saturn in Sag, which has kind of been lurking in the background for a while. And then something definitely not lurking in the background, which is the Eris-Uranus conjunction going on in late Aries. Additionally, and of note, the Uranus-Eris conjunction is trine another planet in the fire signs. That is the second centaur, Pholus. Pholus is the... Let's see. Here's a way to think about Pholus. There was only one centaur planet known up until 1992, and there was nothing known beyond Pluto up until 1992. And in 1992, there are two discoveries made. A lot of discoveries, two major discoveries made by astronomers. One is a second object with an orbit crossing routine, with a orbit of more than a century, so like a long period planet, but with a highly elongated orbit that crosses the orbits of other planets and basically wanders around between Saturn and Neptune. So it's a Uranus crosser, and I'm not sure if it's also a Neptune crosser, but it comes out to Neptune, and it's got that really wide thing, that elongated thing. That was discovered in 92, and so was 1992 QB1, the first object discovered orbiting our sun beyond Pluto. Amazing that we didn't find anything beyond Pluto until 1992 QB1. And by the way, should you be curious about that and the whole class of discoveries, check out my website, 1992qb1.com. I've got that just to make sure that, as long as there's an internet, it will be known about this at this point, which does not have a name, probably never will have a name. So here's the Pholus piece of that. Once Pholus was discovered and QB1 was discovered, then there were like 1,000 or more points discovered beyond Pluto, and a whole slew of centaurs was discovered. There's probably now 100 centaurs. So Pholus opens the bottle and lets out this world of possibilities where before there was nothing that was easily perceived, no other centaurs and nothing beyond Pluto, and then suddenly there was lots beyond Pluto and there were lots of centaurs. So Pholus has a story which involves this kind of release symbolized by the opening of a cask of wine, and then all these other centaurs show up because they're attracted by the smell of the wine and the roasting of meat. Centaurs are supposed to eat their meat raw. The story is worth telling in more detail another time, but the central metaphor of Pholus is the opening of that bottle of wine, and that scent gets out into the forest, and all these centaurs show up. Well, that's exactly what happened. Pholus shows up, and then all these other centaurs show up, along with a bunch of objects in the Kuiper belt, which tend to be the things that are drawn in and become centaurs. So Kuiper objects buzzing out around Pluto, around 300-year orbit, are the things that are pulled inward into the solar system that become these inner solar system orbit, inner meaning inside Neptune, orbit crossers. And there's this other class called scattered disk objects that are Kuiper objects that are pulled out of the Kuiper belt. They're like anti-centaurs into these ridiculously long period orbits, like 10,000 years in the case of Sedna, that are doing the opposite thing. And they're on weird angles to the ecliptic and very distinct and unusual. All of this starts to happen with the discovery of Pholus. Really exciting. And so Pholus now, first of all, is conjunct the galactic center. There have been a lot of conjunctions to the galactic center. We've been getting beamed with galactic energy, galactic core energy, since like the early 2000s when things started going over. And then in like 05 and 6, Pluto went over, and things have thinned out quite a bit in Sagittarius since those times, but Pholus is in a long conjunction to the galactic center in late Sagittarius. And Chiron is in a square to Pholus, square the galactic center. So we've got the first two, arguably most influential Centaur's in a long square aspect that's going to stretch out all the way till 2019, and will follow both of them as they travel into their new signs. As Pholus enters Capricorn and Chiron enters Aries, they will do so in a square aspect. So right now, Chiron and Pholus are operating as one entity. And what makes that so interesting is that the energy of Chiron is so much about containment and things delayed, and the energy of Pholus is so much about release and things accelerated. And so one of the balancing points that we are getting to experience is this tension between the energetic quality of let it all out at once and the energetic quality of a kind of a sustained time release in the form of Chiron. Chiron's very interested in the right thing happening at the right time. And Chiron is also the master of the early gentle warning that then gradually gets ramped up and then can, if ignored, can be catastrophic. And this is one of the reasons why Chiron has such a bad reputation among astrologers and among many people, astrology fans and clients who are not so sure about Chiron or have seen it associated with these disastrous events in the lives and lives of clients. That's about the end of the Chiron process. When Chiron's been ignored, that's what you get. When Chiron's been acknowledged and listened to, there's a whole other way that Chiron is that it manifests. So you might be getting the early warning. The appropriate dose of anything is the message of this Chiron Pholus square. And by the way, speaking of Neptune, Pholus can feel a lot like Neptune, only it's highly focused, pressurized release of Neptune, whereas Neptune can kind of linger around and be in the environment, and you're not sure if you smell that thing or hear that thing, and then you do, then you don't. That's Neptune. Pholus gets your attention because it's like imagine a propane tank. Somebody shoots a propane tank, and if it doesn't blow up, that all that contained high pressure gas just escapes, and it's really intense and exciting, and you can see it happen, and you're wondering if it's going to catch fire. Well, in Sagittarius it might, but then you have Chiron and Pisces keeping a lid on it, and this can relate to artificial substances, but it can also relate to what you might think of as spiritual substance or spiritual experience, in that how fast do you grow? How do you think of the trajectory of your growth? What is it like to have more of a Chiron experience of sustained learning versus a Pholus experience of radical transformation? And at the moment, there's quite a bit in this degree range. And by that I mean approximately 24 to 25 degrees of the signs. So Mars is still late in that game, but Mars is going to change signs. We'll get to that in a second. Pholus is at 24:57, Chiron 24:53, Uranus 24:30, Eris 23:38, all very close together. And Mercury is moving into, it is in aspect to all of these points. So we've got a grand trine right now between Mercury, Pholus, and the Uranus-Eris conjunction. And mixed in with that aspect pattern, that's a grand fire trine. Let's get with the mixed in a second. That's a grand fire trine. And if we're wondering why, let's say, at the Democratic National Convention, things still seem a little out of control, and every time you turn around, there's 20,000 new emails coming out of Hillary Clinton's office, there's your Pholus. Right? That uncontrolled release, that's the energy of Pholus. And now Mercury's going to pick up on that, and it's going to light up Mercury, like really bright, and Mercury is trine Uranus. This can, there's the possibility for things to cycle, to spiral out of control with that grand fire trine, because fire is hard to control once you lose control of fire, it's bad news, right? It's great if you've got it contained in your hot water heater or your stove or the campsite or your fireplace or whatever. But once you lose control, it's not long before the whole shit burns down. The thing that would be applying the brakes to the whole shit burning down would be Chiron. And that's a lot of work for little Chiron to do. But the beauty of Chiron is a little bit goes a long way. And the thing that Chiron is constantly pinging us with is to wake up and pay attention and to focus on healing process, focus on creative process, and focus on the ongoing journey of waking yourself up. And Chiron is talking about doing that gently and gradually, especially Chiron in Pisces, as contrasted with Pholus in Sag, a fire sign, conjunct the galactic center, that wants to make everyone wake up all at once. And if you'll notice, the political environment outside the convention has that quality, even to a little bit inside the convention. You know, the Bernie people who are still hoping that he's somehow going to get the nomination, even though he said, please, this is Hillary's show right now, and I support her. There is that hope, a word that goes around the Sanders part of the world a lot, that there's going to be some radical transformation. And, we don't necessarily know the future. In fact, we barely know it at all. But anyway, I could see where people would be thinking that. I could see where there's this idea that things could just radically transform and people will suddenly wake up. But on the other hand, what about that? And when have we ever seen that? What's the precedent for it? And I acknowledge that there not being a precedent for it, of course, does not mean that it can't happen. It can happen. But Chiron is serving as a kind of a regulating consciousness, saying, think this through one step at a time. Apply some methodical reasoning here, including to what we think of as non-physical and spiritual. So anyway, Mercury comes along, and Mercury is the fast mover inside this aspect pattern. The moon passed through yesterday, and it was a wild first day of the DNC from what I saw. I'm glancing at it from the sidelines. I can't watch it on TV. But it was wild, and, even the New York Post today had on its cover, mayhem at the DNC, Sanders people hijack the convention. It's like, come on. Not exactly, but that's the imagery, and there is this kind of wish that there'll be this like something spreading like wildfire. So grand fire trine Mercury, trine Pholus, trine Uranus, Eris, and other players in that scenario. For example, Chiron right in there, and also of note, Jupiter moving into an opposition with Chiron. Let's get a date on that. It's not on my list for now. Let's see. Events. I'm here working in IO Sprite, the best of IO's programs. This would be Jupiter opposite Chiron. That's about to happen. That is August 12th. Let me add that to my list. That takes place in that's across the Pisces Virgo axis. I'm just going to write that. That would be Jupiter opposite Chiron is on 8, 12, 16. So that's in orb. That's close enough to be viable now, to be feeling that now. And worth mentioning, the relationship between Chiron and any other planet is easy to delineate. And if you want a fun astrological exercise, maybe I'll do a class on this. That would be a cool class. Chiron in aspect to the other planets. Chiron in aspect to Jupiter gives a tap into the wisdom aspect of Jupiter, and it can help kind of ground things from intellectual and spiritual theory into something that Chiron strongly favors and fosters, which is a pragmatic approach to things. And one exciting point about the Chiron-Jupiter opposition is that Chiron is in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign in classical astrology, and Chiron is in Virgo. So Chiron is a representative of Pisces in Virgo. I'm sorry. I got mixed up here. Let's do this again. Jupiter is in Virgo. Chiron's in Pisces. Jupiter is the classical ruling planet of Pisces. It's in its opposite sign. Chiron is strongly associated with Virgo. I don't believe these modern planets have rulerships like the classical planets do. However, it is in its kind of an opposite placement. But the interesting thing is that in its opposite placement, Chiron has a kind of exalted flavor in Pisces. Chiron does very well, so it's clearly not in any kind of detriment or fall. Those don't apply, but there is energy cycling between Chiron and Jupiter because they're on the axis of Virgo Pisces, and that's something special. And what's also interesting is that when they make this opposition, they're going to be at 24 and change, 24 degrees, 21 minutes, exactly square Pholus, and with Uranus still in its degree, trine Pholus, trine Uranus, Pholus, trine Eris. This is a powerful configuration, and one by one, planets are going to pass through this and make contact with Chiron and Pholus and Uranus Eris simultaneously, and there's going to be a new kind of rev that happens every time this happens, including in mid-August when the Sun passes through and forms its own grand fire trine there. All right, so I've gone on for a while and talked about things I was not planning to do at all. Of immediate note, and it is indeed immediate, which is that Mars is going to leave Scorpio, the sign where it's stationed direct, on August 2nd, and that is the day of the Leo new moon. So we get a kind of new burst of fire energy. Mars mounts the mutable cross and also the fiery grouping of signs on the 2nd, at the same time as the new moon in Leo. And what is I think the single most significant thing about Mars changing signs, it's going to take 22 days of August from the 2nd to the 24th to complete a conjunction to Saturn. And to me, that is the real closure point of Mars retrograde and all of the things that we have thought about and learned on this journey of Mars retrograde. And I'll have more to say about that. Well, let's see. What's the next? I'll focus that on the next program, because Mars will be in Sag at that time, and then we'll have kind of a direct energy line into the Mars Saturn conjunction of August 24th. I'm going to skip going too much into September. For now, I mentioned that Jupiter enters Libra on September 9th. That's enough September for us at the moment. Let's keep present. And by the way, all of these aspects I'm describing, I'm going to cover in the Planet Waves mid-year reading. That's my mid-year reading for all 12 signs called Balance. Check your email, check Facebook, and check Planet Waves FM for information about balance. And I will also be posting to all of those venues my one question for everyone about this theme of balance, which is what do you do to stay in balance in these wildly unbalanced times in which we are living. All right, let's take a song break and let David Byrne and Talking Heads carry some of this message. The song is called The Democratic Circus from the 1988 CD Naked. A beautifully haunting song again called The Democratic Circus from the very last Talking Heads album. That was Naked. Well worth playing that whole album. It's really incredible. And came out the year that George H.W. Bush was elected. That was 1988. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. So it was a kind of a acknowledgement of the political environment. And boy, is it accurate picture with the celebrities all coming out, especially on the Democratic side. Sarah Silverman last night and others, political celebrities, Elizabeth Warren. When you do all this political mathematics, you really wonder who represents what and what it all means. For me, it's important to remember what Wilhelm Reich said about politics. Wilhelm Reich was one of the brightest students of Sigmund Freud and way early on split off on his own and did not submit to the, let's say, the distortions of Freud that were based on his fear of the Nazis and their antipathy toward knowledge and knowledge about sex in particular. Reich was all about knowledge about sex and its impact, and his what I would consider his most important work, called The Function of the Orgasm, is an analysis of the relationship between sexuality and politics, between sexuality and governance. And what Reich proposes and documents is that the purpose of sexual repression within the family structure is to make children well-behaved. It is merely for the convenience of the parents. It also saves the parents having to say much and teach much and be vulnerable to their children, but mainly it's about the convenience of the parents and, in a sense, kind of a bass-backwards way, honors the fact that the parents are suppressed and held down and for the most part sexually unhappy, and therefore the children also have to be that way too. But long before sex is even a question, the suppression of sex makes kids less precocious, less curious, less creative, and easier to manage. And Reich calls this the authoritarian miniature state of the family. The family is a model of the state, and when these children become adults and grow up and enter their adult relationship with society and the state, what you get are easy to manage people who are well behaved and do what they're told, and come out on election day and don't do anything else, and don't act too curious or too excited, and don't say too much, and don't make too much noise, and don't let people know how you really feel, and all that stuff. And therefore, it's no surprise that Reich described politics as being the very peak of neurosis, that it is the sickest game in town. And if you look at this and you think, how could this be so screwed up? How could it possibly be this bad? Well, there was a philosopher, psychiatrist, medical doctor, philosopher, thinker, who explained this, who figured it out, and who gave us a model that helps us understand why and how it is so completely, utterly foobar. And when you see, for example, these betrayals of long-held viewpoints on the one, all over the place. I mean, everyone has cashed in to the two primary candidates. There's Sandersnistas who are holding out, and I respect them for holding out in terms of not agreeing with the dominant paradigm, not accepting that this is so acceptable, even though Bernie is also right in saying that, well, in my opinion, that, well, really, Trump? But then there's another viewpoint that the Clintons put Trump up to this. They're very clever people, and they go back a long way with the Donald. And according to my friend Dominic Vanacore, who can't find this link, and if you can find this, please tell me. You might even be on the Planet Waves editors list, and you sent it around and I missed it because I was doing something else. That there were payments made from the Clinton organization to the Trump organization in this year that were documented in a spreadsheet that WikiLeaks got hold of from the raided emails from Putin, whatever. Swipe the DNC's emails, and today I saw a list of all the connections of Trump to Putin and the Russians. Wow, that's exciting. So, like, you just don't know who's on what side, and it doesn't matter really, because pretty much you can figure they're not on your side. But why? How did it get this way? Why are they so messed up? Well, you would kind of have to read The Function of the Orgasm by Wilhelm Reich, and then you can call me up or sit in my counseling room. We can talk about it and figure out what the story is. And if you're one of those Reichians, there's not very many left who have dived deep enough into this literature to understand his concept of how fascism takes hold. It takes hold through this neurosis, this chaos. It's not quite psychosis, though it's in some of the top players it is. That takes hold through the process of holding down natural sexual instincts. And this becomes what Reich called the mystical longing. And the mystical longing is answered in the authoritarian leader. He's the answer, or she is the answer to that craving for something that is so distorted by the time someone's in their 40s or 50s. They don't really know what the heck it is. And most people don't associate much of anything with their repressed sexuality. Maybe they know that could be better. They think their friends are having better sex than they are. That's just scratching the surface. It might be true. It might not be true. You never really know who's having more fun when they get naked, except that they're happy, except that they're generous, that they're kind, that they're not into competing. It's just too much fun to have to bother being competitive all the time. And when people become competitive and vindictive and completely unscrupulous about pretty much everything, generally at the heart of that is some deeply held down and corrupted by resentment and anger and guilt and shame version of their sexuality. So I keep looking at this whole scene, and it's it's easier to see on the Republican side where they openly hate LGBT people. They openly hate women, though they pretend to not hate women. They openly hate darker people, whom Reich describes as the projection screen of our dismembered, pardon the pun, sexuality is projected onto Jews and blacks. Basically, in the 30s, it was the Jew was considered the sexually dominant, darker person, which is one of Reich's theories of why Hitler has so badly had it in for Jewish people, because the lighter-skinned race, which is what this whole Aryan thing was all about, right? We're going to become the pure, blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned, perfect people. Well, that's sort of opposite me, a Sicilian, or maybe a Moroccan, or a Jewish person, or a black person, or any number of other races who are not purebred, blue-eyed, white, blonde-haired people, a lot of this is about sex. I mean, so in our age, we have all these mythologies about the sexual prowess of black people. Well, back in the day, there was a lot of fear about the sexual prowess of Jewish people. And now Jewish people are white, and they've been accepted into whiteness. Whiteness is this club that gradually accepts you. My people, when they came to the United States, were Guineas and Wops and Dagos, and basically worked as slaves in the early 20th century. For 10 cents an hour, 5 cents an hour, whatever my grandparents were paid to lay brick and scrub floors, and now I get to be white too, but I wasn't. In 1910, I wouldn't have been a white guy. 2016, oh, what a difference a century makes. But for African Americans, it ain't happening quickly. And anyway, so here's my story of how I got out of politics. In the mid-1980s, there was a kind of a surge of campus activism. It was had a 60s flavor to it. When I went back and checked the astrology, it was the Uranus-Pluto semi-square. The conjunction happens in 65 and 66, and then take that 20 years later, and they reach a semi-square, 45-degree aspect, a trigger aspect, and a real aspect. It's a real one. And so there was, around that time, a 60s-like flavor. And it was exciting, and it was interesting to be involved. And it was pre-9/11 and pre the Bushes and pre a lot of really, well, Bush was vice president, but no one imagined how bad things could possibly get. And so I was involved, and it seemed like the thing to do. I was also an editor-in-chief of various things, including Generation Magazine, and always had one hand in politics all the way through. So I was involved in pretty much every student government president election. At SUNY Buffalo, that meant you controlled a $2 million budget, and then various student services corporations where you appointed members to the board of directors. It was worth either being the student association president or being closely affiliated with them. It was real politics, and it was so real that, for example, the college Republicans were somewhat new at this point, but they were also pretty influential on campuses, and were threatening to do things like record the lectures of professors who were too liberal and then send the recordings to places that might fund the university. And there was kind of a force feeding of conservative values and attitudes being conducted by a number of different forces, one of them being the National Organization of the College Republicans. And there were many in the kind of David Koch dark money network, many sources of funding flowing in to make this work. And so there was first of all, there was a real adversary, and it was worth doing, and it was, to me, it seemed worth keeping these assholes out of office. And so I got involved, and Karl Rove, who became quote unquote Bush's brain, was president of the College Republicans when H.W. Bush, Poppy Bush, was vice president, and that's how he met Poppy Bush. That's how Rove met the vice president, who then assigned him to be the kind of babysitter and overlord of his very troubled son, George Bush, who became president for 8 agonizing years. Though I'd probably vote for him if it was Bush versus Trump. That tells you something. So the CRs were college Republicans, were powerful and became very, very powerful. So that was the stakes of the game. And where I saw myself going on one particular possible path was onto the top level of campaign writing because I was pretty good at it. I got everyone elected. I never lost an election. Once I got involved, I had a straight winning streak straight through, and did better and better every time. And we were pretty masterful, me and people I worked with, at branding these candidates and writing excellent campaign literature to get them elected. And it cost money to do that. And in one of these campaigns, it cost money, and or you needed to have a supply line, by which I mean, cartons and cartons and cartons of paper and access to a printing press or mimeo machine. So finally, I was in charge of getting my friend Paul Vertolino elected student government president, which I did wholly willingly, and at that point was well trained in the game. I had been involved in on the top level of two previous election campaigns and had won both, and I knew how to do it at that point. So it's time for me to run Paul's campaign, and I knew what to do. And the thing is that you couldn't win the election spending the amount of money that you were allowed to spend. So by the time Paul was running for student government president, the spending limit was $300 on a campus with 161 buildings. So you had $2 per building to get your candidate elected. It was impossible. It was ridiculous. There was no way to do it. We were entering this pre-internet time where branding was everything. So not only did you have to have excellent branding and a clever name for the political party, because we had little political parties would form. This was the Access campaign. I'll see if I can attach a piece of Access campaign literature onto this program so you can see what it looked like. It'll be real, and it was the logo was a bank card, appropriately, just an icon of which were then new at the time, Moneymatic type of card, ATM card. And the campaign was called Access. And I had to spend about $2,500, which I got from a student loan check. I got a student loan check. I cashed the student loan check, my only student loan. I cashed my student loan check, and I financed Paul's campaign with this. And I was also responsible for making up the cock and bull story about how we did it for under $296.98 was the amount that I came up with. And so I had to come up with the whole story and all the documentation and various different things, and figured out how to do it. I took a guess and decided that though I didn't check, I accurately guessed that the Elections and Credentials Committee didn't have a Niagara Falls phone book on their bookshelf. Niagara Falls was the next city over. I figured they would figure that this whole campaign was printed somewhere in Buffalo, and would call every print shop in Buffalo to find out. But I was ahead of them, and drove around and found a print shop in the middle of Hooker Chemical in Niagara Falls, in the midst of basically the industry that I would later cover. The chemical industry was centered on this place called Grand Island, and all of these chemical processing plants were there. And in the middle of it somehow was a print shop. So I went in one day and I said, "Hello, Mr. Printer. I'm going to be bringing you some print jobs. Are you willing to take them? They're fast turnaround. And I'm going to give you cash money, and you're going to give me boxes of printed material, and there's going to be absolutely no paperwork generated, and you've never heard of me in your entire life, right? Good." So I trusted him, and he got business out of it, and I spent about $2,500 in his print shop in the course of about 3 weeks. That's not bad business. And we won. Paul, all of our candidates, 7 candidates, got elected by the biggest voter turnout and the widest margin of victory in history. And I didn't feel bad about it, because every candidate would spend about $2,000 because you couldn't do it any other way. You just couldn't do it unless you were like in previous years. We had the help of the Graduate Student Association, a bunch of Marxists who kind of we were in with, and they were a student organization, a student association, large funding, right? And they had a huge cabinet full of paper, a really good Mimeo machine. So for one of these campaigns, we just were given the keys to the Graduate Student Association office and printed our 50,000 pieces of literature there. By the time a couple of years had passed, that connection wasn't there, and I just did it for money. I just paid for the campaign myself, and mind you, with no deal. I had no deal in this. I mean, all I wanted was for Paul to get elected. I loved and love him. Haven't talked to him in many years, but he was a decent guy and the absolutely right person for the job. And I didn't need any payback here. I just wanted to get him in, and his fellow candidates, and that's what I did. And I was willing to work and get all my friends involved and pay for it. So we won, and this was in March of 1986. In the middle of this is when the Course in Miracles arrives in my life, and we won the election. I think was March 12th, 13th, and 14th or something. It was like right in the mid-March there, and as always happened every year, the other side cried foul. That's what you did, right? Everybody would spend money more than the limit, and then after the election, the loser would cry foul. So the loser cried foul, David Grubler, whose political side was the incumbent, I believe. I'm not sure about that, but they were in office, and so his guys investigated us and couldn't find anything. I covered the tracks really well. They never got anywhere near my printer in Grand Island. They never were able to affirmatively prove how much money we spent. Nothing. They were not able to prove that our documents were fake. They couldn't prove anything. But the price of that was I had to lie. And I hadn't quite counted on that because I was just playing the game the way the game was played, not thinking that I would have to lie to the public to validate this. Usually it was pretty quiet and, we don't understand what you did, but we can't prove you did anything. We don't have any tally of how many posters you printed, and that's it. But that's not how this went down. There was a huge controversy that blew into the daily paper, and I went from being one of the most respected figures on campus, having co-founded the Student Handbook and a gorgeous magazine called Generation, which stayed in print 25 years, to being someone who now had to lie to the students I loved. And that was one of the worst things in my entire life. It may be the worst thing, aside from losing a loved one, that ever happened to me. And it was messy. And fortunately, we had the right connections. We had the right attorneys. We had the right everything. And I did a good job at the campaign. We got more votes. It's hard to take that away, really, from a candidate when they actually get more votes, right? We didn't stuff the ballot boxes. All we did was print more posters than we were supposed to, as did our adversary. And, and they had various other, dirty tricks they could do, which we didn't have because we weren't in power at the time. We were just vying to get elected. And it was the experience of basically stepping in front of a microphone or having a newspaper reporter call me, and it was the one and only time I ever did this, ever. And having to lie was so agonizing and tortured my conscience for years after this. Years. I got over this sometime in by the time I started my next major student project, the Student Leader News Service, about maybe 3 years later, I had gotten over it and processed it spiritually. But the decision that I made at that time, when I was by my own creation, put myself in the position of having to absolutely construct versions of the truth that were not true and that I would have to stick by till this day. Of course, I freely admit this now. It's 30 years later, and it's my model of why politics is a defunct system. What I figured out from that whole experience was that lying is the stock and trade of politics. That in front of the scenes, there's this show, and behind the scenes, there's this other thing going on, right? There is a story that's made up, and then there is what's actually happening. There's all the agreements and arrangements that are made, and all the strings and levers that are pulled, and then there's what gets into the newspaper, or what gets entered as testimony, and none of what actually happened ever came out. Only the fake version that was challenged and unsuccessfully challenged. But I knew I couldn't do that with my life. Couldn't do it to people. I couldn't do it to myself. And I got one of the most profound life lessons that the inherent nature of politics is to deceive. And so I chose one of my other options on the table, which was to pursue a path as an independent investigative reporter, or I didn't know that at that time. During all of this election mess, Chernobyl blows up. So it was a pretty painful time. It was also my Chiron square, my first Chiron square. So I entered this patch of real crisis in my life, coupled with Chernobyl happening, the first ever full-on nuclear meltdown, and was devastated by this. I understood what it was because my father is in the nuclear industry, and so I had background, and so I felt a calling in the direction of environmental journalism. At the same time, I realized there was no way that I could be in politics as a campaign writer. I would have ended up the Democratic Karl Rove, basically, or Luntz, the strategist on the Democratic side. But I knew I couldn't play that game that way because it just involved lying as a matter of course. And people who can do that are the ones who become the most successful politicians. If you can make shit up and you have absolutely no need to have anything you say have any bearing in reality, and you're willing to live that front, you can do it. I also knew I was going through a profound sexual awakening at that time, that I was ineligible to be a candidate because of my sexual proclivities. I discovered I was polyamorous at that point, and knew, without having read Wilhelm Reich, that to be a sexually free and experimental person precluded involvement in politics as a candidate. Especially at that time, and even to this day, you've got to be married, heterosexual to hold high office, right? You have to have the absolute appearance of normality. So I had enough insight to know, okay, this is not compatible with my innate sexuality, and it's not compatible with preferring the truth, with a devotion to the truth. And I went, and then I proceeded on my, professional journalistic career, which involved covering Monsanto, General Electric, and Westinghouse. That grew out of that choice that I made, that calling from Chernobyl, and realizing, holy shit, this game is about blatant deception. I mean, including the campaign that we ran. I figured out that in Buffalo, I don't know how it's done anymore and how it is on other campuses. There were major issues happening on campus, including, for example, the university going to Division I sports. Right, so this was a huge issue for many reasons. And NCAA Division I is just a mess. And in terms of a lot of this has come out, by the way, it's no longer under wraps. We even then knew there was massive sexual bias, that men got the money and the attention and the scholarships and all the glory, and we didn't like that. We were on the left side of the political spectrum. It was more of the right wingers who said, "Yeah, bring on the scholarships and the money and the sports and the team spirit." Well, I figured out there was no point blocking that train. We took a position of being in favor of NCAA Division I on the condition that there was adequate student input. So we created a position, but to my thinking, that was a very serious compromise. But I also knew that if we wanted to win, we had to compromise. And it's not that much fun to compromise on things that you care about. We knew that NCAA was going to happen. If the college president, Stephen Sample, was able to, the real college president, able to get it to happen, there was nothing students were going to do to be able to stop it. So we figured, let's position ourselves in a non-adversarial way with the majority position of the student body, the majority position of the administration. And I knew full well that part of the great heritage of SUNY Buffalo was in the 1960s, the faculty senate threw out the ROTC, they threw out fraternities, and they threw out NCAA sports. And I love to this day that heritage of SUNY Buffalo. It's a very different place now, loaded with Greek organizations, and I'm sure ROTC is back on campus, and Reserve Officer Training Corps, which had a very different meaning in the 60s. It meant you were going to Vietnam as an officer in the 60s. But the faculty stood up to the administration and ended all of these things. By 70, they were gone. By 86, they were coming back, and we knew which way the wind was blowing. Again, not consistent with my values, and so I knew this was not my game. And I would just propose here that politics on the national arena, is not that different from politics the way we were doing it at SUNY Buffalo. There were millions of dollars involved, which is a lot of money for young students to have control over. There was considerable political influence involved. Everyone who was student president did well in some career or another. You were on the level. You were well on your way by that time, and so there was something very real about this. I mean, many times student or organization issues would end up in state Supreme Court. It was hardball. It was not major league hardball, but it was some serious minor league hardball. And I considered it to be a kind of a cell biology experiment, or kind of a microcosmic experiment of how politics works. And there's really very little that is different that I can see 30 years observation of politics than what we were doing on that campus at that time, and consistently over the years we're doing. So that's my story, and this is one of my major aversions to involvement in politics, and above and beyond those aversions, I maintain awareness, and I stay involved in civics in my community, and generally prefer not to get involved in electoral politics. Though last year, in the autumn, there was a campaign for mayor, and I got back in. I decided I was going to take part this time, and I worked for the Republicans because I had very serious gripes with what the Democrats had done, and including on environmental issues, despite their reputation as being the pro-environmentalists, and one crucial community issue, and I did not want those people in office. I don't care what political party they were. So I brought my portfolio over to the local kingmaker who was running the campaign for the Republican candidate, Ron Polacco, and I was inside the smoke-filled rooms once again. The top assistant to the campaign manager involved in almost all the important decisions and saw exactly what I had seen going on at SUNY Buffalo, only slightly different arena, slightly different people, much more at stake, and was reminded, kind of on the Saturn return of my exiting politics, I dipped my finger back into electoral politics and realized, oh, for fuck's sake, it's the same thing. The real issues can never be talked about. The hilarious thing about the whole campaign was that neither candidate could talk about the real issues. The way that this sort of bizarre unwritten rules of city politics in Kingston were laid out was no one could take a real stand. In effect, it became a popularity contest. That's all it was. There were no real issues discussed. And it was completely pathetic as such, and I invested a lot of time, creativity, and my friend Liz Webb and I invented this beautiful baseball card because it was the World Series, and we made the Ron Polacco baseball card. Good campaign literature. It was a fun bit. I'll ask Liz if she can provide us with a copy of that PDF of that baseball card for inclusion. So I'm not turned on by this game, and I stay as aware as I can, but I don't think the solution to our problems is going to be a political solution. I don't think it's going to happen that way. I think that it's necessary to understand the game to transcend it. You have to understand it. I think that it is necessary to some extent to be involved. Some people have to be involved because in the transition between paradigms, the people who can get involved and not be corrupted have to take part, and they need support. And we have to look at the serious sellout points. I mean, I think that the most serious thing about Bernie Sanders, much as I think he's the better candidate, and had I gotten the call and said, hey, we need your talent, I would have gone. I do agree he was the better candidate. But for example, one of his huge compromises is the F-35 fighter plane. This first of all, insanely multi-trillion-dollar fighter plane project that is really dangerous. This plane is really dangerous for the pilot of this plane. And I can't believe they even did this, that they even designed so many airplanes fly so well and so dependably. But this is a lot of money involved, and some of that money came to Vermont, which needed it. And I think we need to talk about the F-35. We talk about Sanders, talk about oligarchy, great. Talk about his excellent position on access to public higher education, great. But what about the F-35? The issue in this country is the war and poverty. The insane extent to which the money goes into the military-industrial complex, by the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, more money than you can even conceive of, is going into the military-industrial complex. And this is the concern about Clinton, because she has taken consistently pro-war positions throughout her career, right down to one of the most devastating moments of my life as an observer of national politics, which was her floor speech in the Senate supporting the invasion of Iraq. And I mean, listen to that con job. I mean, listen to what she did and what she said. And I don't blame people for being extremely suspicious of Hillary Clinton. The only thing I'm interested in with Hillary Clinton is that she's likely to appoint pro-choice Supreme Court justices. And it's possible she'll appoint Supreme Court justices who are willing to reverse Citizens United, the Citizens United decision. But I'm not so sure about that. I am certain she would appoint pro-choice Supreme Court judges. And that's not going to be true of any Republican administration. And I can talk about why this issue is so important, but in summary, we do not have an equal rights amendment in this country. That went down in the late 70s. It's not happening. And it's a very simple thing that says that, men and women shall be regarded as equals under the law. That's all the ERA says. And that didn't pass. And what did was the Supreme Court decision Roe versus Wade, which is connected to the Griswold line of decisions, which are about the right to privacy and how the right to privacy includes what you do with your body and your doctor. You can take birth control, and up to a point, you're entitled to abort a pregnancy. And this is the very fine line between personhood, legal personhood for women, and legal non-personhood for women. As distasteful as abortion is, that's the dividing line. To be able to have control over your reproductive destiny. And in addition, if abortion is made illegal, every pregnancy will be a potential crime scene. There are women in jail in Mexico right now for abortion. And there is therefore the possibility of miscarriage being considered murder, and that would involve the regulation of every pregnancy. And Trump himself has said that women should be punished for having an abortion. Well, you who perhaps have had an abortion, do you think you should go to jail for that, or is that just over the top? And these this whole fundamentalist Christian viewpoint, and Pence is one of these fundamentalist Christian bastards who would think nothing of imposing the American Taliban, straight on up to putting women in jail for having an abortion. This is absolutely insane. And this is one path that we can go on. And so for me, the pro-choice justices on the Supreme Court is enough. It's all I would expect. I have extremely low expectations of the American president. I assume they're going to bomb people, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. And there's going to be all kinds of dirty dealings. But keep your fucking laws off of the uteruses of women. All right, so there you go. That's what I have to say to you today. However, I am going to be back in a second. The minute you click on that other player, and me and this guy Bob Schmidt are going to talk about the first known document in astrology called the Thema Mundi, and that's a whole other program for you. So I'm going to do a short introduction to that. I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm just going to let the facts come out in the conversation. I'm going to take a picture of the Thema Mundi or get one off the internet and stick it on the page. So I've got a couple of things I'm going to put up, including a thing from the Access campaign, the Thema Mundi, and we'll see if we can get the Ron Polacco baseball card. It's so beautiful. Liz, you did a great job on that one, really. And I'll be back in a digital instant. I'm going to leave you with one more song from Talking Heads from that album, and this is dedicated to all of you folks who love Bernie Sanders. It's called Nothing But Flowers.